Namaste, viewers. Welcome to our conversation or podcast or poetry lab, as we'd like to call it, because the poet is with us. The poet is live, and we rarely get an opportunity to sort of dig in behind the scenes to think about the influences, the circumstances of composition, and do a live analysis of the poem as well. That's why we want to call this the Poetry Lab. And without further ado, to the poems and to the poet, Dr. Parikshit Singh. Thank you for joining us, sir. And this very moving collection of poems, Satya, Poems to My Father. It's a collection both of bereavement, but also in some ways of fulfillment, of celebration, of moving on, and of when do we move on? We move on not only when we sort of give up a very painful attachment, but when we move to higher levels of consciousness. So ultimately, that is our journey. And let's go, sir, straight away to this poem called Unpeeling an Onion. So, first of all, we want you to read the poem for us, but you have to tell us what's the difference between peeling an onion and unpeeling an onion.
Un- this is an inner onion, so it's an Inion.
So you can't peel it. You only have to unpeel it. You know, but the onion is one of those peculiar things where peeling and unpeeling amounts to the same thing.
Right.
But let's unpeel this Inion. Let's do that. Page 41 for those who have the book.
Unpeeling an Inion. It is appropriate that one should cry before peeling an onion. Why? A strange comment from you, incongruous even now with the accompanying chuckle. I did not feel the edge of this anodyne until I peeled my own layer by layer. First to go was mind, that root of onion brain, with myriad memories, with that artichoke of sound curled inwards into patterns of words and thought, reversed, as the infant grew into the subterranean bulb, reflections lit by needles of blindness. Then the life of instinct, of intensity, to grab the world and squeeze it, to slice, chop, splice, rip into minuscule bits as tears turn to glow. But the heart is where the tendrils tend to grow. In the corners of the eyes and the film in blur that passes by in a blink to help, to heal, to give, even as it stings while you reel. But at the core, the embryo, where rivulets begin to flow, pale as eyes inexorably begin to close. There, in the germ, the seed is the last veil, where you end your sight and learn to see. The you extending beyond you, and a face of mirror glimmering through.
So viewers, you'll see again the several different patterns of rhymes and sounds, the concluding couplet, you and through, but before that, embryo, flow, I, by, reel, heal. You'll notice heal is not the last word in the line, so it's an internal rhyme. So it's a poem, obviously, which is about different levels, if you may, use that term, or different layers, if you think about an onion, but different levels of consciousness. And birth and death, you see, in flow, in continuous flow. So there is the physical, then again the instinctual, the life of the mind, and then something beyond the mind. One is, reminded of the Aurobindonian fivefold framework and how in the Hindu way of thinking about these matters, the sthula sharira, the sukshma sharira, and the karana sharira. That karana sharira is that seed, that beej, from which, the, karmas, the storehouse of karmas then generates another body. So a beautiful poem, sir, and very moving. But again, should you cry before peeling an onion or while you're peeling an onion?
Yeah. The metaphor, it's interesting. The metaphor kept opening up. I started with the metaphor, and as you know, it was 1 o'clock at night, and in that sleepless, dreamless state where one is ready to pass out, just the words just tumble. And you start with a metaphor. Sometimes, as Stephen Spender said, you start with the phrase, a turn of phrase, he used to say. Turn of phrase starts his poem. But then it just kept extending itself, and as almost like unpeeling the metaphor too at the same time. And this is probably a good way of describing what I went through after he was gone. What happens is then you have a flood of memories because the person is no longer there, and mentally you try to stop it, but then it comes emotionally, and then even physical memory is there because the father is a part of your somewhere, even at the cellular level. And to let go of that it's a lot of teariness, perhaps. Maybe not overt tears, but you have that shine in your eye that is apology, regret, but also at the same time, kind of thankfulness. It's a very mixed, strange feeling when you lose your father. And that's what I went through with him. And what happens is it's, again, the father as the teacher, father also as the hard stick in your
Taskmaster.
life, taskmaster who doesn't let you fail too often, and yet there's somewhere in that strictness, that there is the strength of protection. And sometimes that becomes painful, but also that protection is your foundation, and that foundation is what suddenly goes from you. And now you are basically working, all you have to do is work on yourself in that absence. Now it was earlier a presence that was overwhelming, now it's the absence that is overwhelming, and now you have to see how far you can take it. Some tattva of the father remains, some essence remains, which is difficult to quantify or even sometimes even qualify. You feel it and yet you don't. And so, in that state of finding that seed, that germ that is yet elusive, the poem goes beyond itself, kind of. So, it was a very inconclusive poem in that sense, yet I think you have exhausted all your avenues, and you
Yeah,
turn
I
back
mean,
to
I think,
yourself.
I think that, structurally, when you have a strong couplet, at the end of a certain number of stanzas, and when the couplet rhymes, it actually forms a base. It gives a very solid ground for the poem. So I was in fact going to comment on how the onion is really a metaphor for something which doesn't have a core, because you keep peeling layer after layer. But actually, in my view, at least as a reader, something does come through. You already spoke about the idea of the seed or the core. But here, the you extending beyond you and a face of mirror glimmering through. So, you see, the father has become the sun, as it were, because the face staring back in the mirror, is the son looking at himself in the mirror, but the person looking back is actually of his father. So, in other words, the son has become another version of his father, so that merger or that confluence is, to me, very telling at the end, that you look for the core. There's no core, but there is a flow in which, the two have merged. And at the same time, the father has gone beyond that face, beyond the form. We already talked about that in the earlier, discussions. And the son, in letting go, as you've said, you have to let go of the structures of the mind, because the thoughts, the memories, and then deeper down the instinct, because that world is harder to access for most of us. So the son is also letting go. There's a kind of unpeeling, as it were, going on there, that, how deep those memories have actually taken root. And then when you deconstruct them and, the release, that process of release. So I also wanted to ask you about, you said you start with a metaphor with a strong image like that of an onion. But there's also an artichoke here, if you want a conversation between two two vegetables. So onion and artichoke. Now, artichoke also has, it's a bulb, it's subterraneous, curled, it has layers like the onion, but it doesn't make you cry.
It doesn't, but it's very sharp. Have you tried cutting an artichoke? The term itself makes me choke because it
No, that is so true that, you use that sound, the sense of the sound. I mean, an artichoke, when you taste it, is not as sharp as an onion.
that's the inside. The outer, if you get the artichoke that even has one layer left, it is rough. It is not soft like the heart. The heart is very soft. But yeah, you're right. I mean, you can't really compare the two. But it's just one of those poetic delights that you have. I got to throw in an artichoke in there in this salad of words.
No, I think it works because you've made it the artichoke of sound curled inward. That's a great image to me, into patterns of words and thought reversed as the infant grew. So, I was listening to, a master, a spiritual master, who teaches people to, stop the mind. Now, obviously, it's very hard to stop the mind, as we all know. But what he recommends is that the mind is basically, according to him, it's very interesting because we keep talking about sound and language. According to him, the mind stops if you can make speech stop. So he talks about a muscular relaxation. So he's saying that if you want to stop the mind, the first thing you have to do is relax the mouth and stop the, silent chattering, as it were. So I found that very interesting, that the artichoke of sound curled inwards into patterns of words and thought. So it's that artichoke of sound that has to unravel, as it were. And we just, it's muscularity, because the mind, which is a function of the brain is also a muscle. So, I mean, it certainly works for me. And the subterraneous bulb, now, subterraneous again, leads to a sense of darkness. See the image, needles of blindness. So, actually, death, I mean, when we transit from this world, it's really a very smoky world out there. Those who have made the journey, and some of them come back, their near death experiences. But our senses, like in a dream state, our senses don't work that well. And, we can't see clearly. So, sight it gets clouded. So, needles of blindness, for me, very powerful metaphor. So, I think the poem functions, I think it progresses and functions quite well. And I like the idea of the onion also being an anodyne,
Yeah,
obviously, I mean, the onion has curative properties, but I mean, tears are curative. We all know in
that's
grief,
right.
right? And you have a moment later in the poem, in the collection of poems, rather, where there's that cathartic moment in the butterfly park when you're actually going into a corner and crying, because for many of us it's not easy to cry, especially for men.
Yes,
So and so the metaphors of seeing, light, also sound, we've seen earlier, artichoke of sound, but the blur, the next stanza, the film in blur that passes by in a blink, right? To help, to heal, to give, even as it stings while you reel. So the tears that come, especially when you're chopping an onion, they sting, but they still release something. And I remember as a child going into the kitchen, my mom chopping onions, and I'd ask her, "Why are you crying?" And then she would say, "I'm not crying, I'm just chopping onions." So, because I used to be very concerned that what's happened? Is she unhappy? What's happened to her? So, anyhow, a wonderful poem. It's about learning to see where sight ends. The last veil is rent, and then you have to learn to see all over again, isn't it? Uh, and I think that's what I meant when I said that when you shift into another world, into another level of consciousness, your structures of mind and body and sound are not adequate to make sense of reality. It's like you have to learn to see all over again, right? It's that
yes,
sense of freshness, of wonder. It is a journey. And poetry is that, uh, lovely and wondrous journey that we share, which connects us with that world, right? As we've seen in the amazing Veda from the earliest utterances to today. It's that inspired word, isn't it? Which becomes a vehicle to connect us to our deeper reality. So, any concluding thoughts, sir, before we continue to the next episode?
um no, it's just actually that keeps bringing me to a very homely or homey connection with the father, and how that kind of circulates in your own head and creates a very spiral, or something that creates a vortex. And something very simple when your loved one is gone, something very simple, a statement, a thing, something he did, something idiosyncratic, and that triggers off a kind of very multi-dimensional or multi-level movement. And so that's what happened here. It's a very interesting poem. I wouldn't have been able to write it in a conscious way. It just kind of just stumbled through. And it's perhaps how, even if I remember him now, I'm completely gone. It's a complete wipeout. uh Memory seems to be gone, but just an intimate, some touch, some tattva of his has remained, something very subtle. And at that point, one feels that the poem kind of justified itself. One little trigger went through a whole bunch of thoughts and feelings, and then suddenly, now it's gone. So that way, it seems to be satisfying. And the rhymes kind of interlink and interlock and create that cyclical movement. um, and this structure, perhaps subconsciously has come to us from our own. If you see the Vedic or Gita, which I teach others how they're interlinked, and then I've subconsciously absorbed it. I didn't realize it until you pointed out that I'm using the techniques that I admire.
We become that which we admire. But
Yes,
wonderful on that note of the cascade of memories and sensations and emotions that before it settles, you know, creates a kind of storm in our minds and results sometime in a beautiful poem which is encapsulated in a powerful image like that of an onion. Thank you, sir. And we'll see you. Namaste. We'll see you all soon. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And join us again in our Poetry Lab with Dr. Parikshit Singh. Namaste.
Thank you.